predictor. So, using these different models, it seems as though the physical attack is highly significant, piracy matters, and in general, we find very minimal influence of what we might refer to as ethnocentric beliefs. Demographic predictors are not necessarily strong. Gender doesn't seem to matter. Age doesn't seem to necessarily matter. The relationship between technological skill and the attack type we thought was relatively interesting also, given that it's tied to physical attacks overall. Maybe it's something to do with general involvement in technology. We might think of the hacker culture as being, to a certain degree, kind of counterculture, this belief in information being free and otherwise. Maybe this has some influence. The fact that it doesn't matter when it comes to either domestic or foreign cyber attack, though, is different than what we might have otherwise expected. Perhaps it's a suggestion that in a virtual environment, attackers are willing to do whatever they can, regardless of overall skill. In terms of the physical and cyber attack relationship, it seems like these two spaces really converge. If you're willing to do something in one domain, you're probably going to be willing to do it in the other. The piracy relationship was also relatively important, noting it both for cyber attack and to a certain degree for physical attacks. This could be some kind of a general reflection maybe of ethical attitudes toward behavior on and offline. Willingness to pirate materials might be some kind of a larger reflection of how you feel about legal strictures, the notion of copyright and ownership. This is still something we're trying to figure out, but it's important to note that this is something that appears to be at play. The significance of being a U.S. citizen also is key. This could be just a consequence of the larger sample of U.S. Citizens overall, but it could be, again, a reflection of how we perceive the ability to talk about our government and deal with different dynamics. And the outgroup antagonism item for physical attacks and to a certain degree cyber attacks is also very interesting. Perhaps those who have more sympathy towards others are willing to engage in attacks that they feel are supportive of the entire country or the entire nation, not marginalizing one group over another. Group equality also seems to be important. Those who are less supportive of the group appear more willing to engage in certain kinds of attacks. And emotive national identity, being low, suggests that if you don't really care or have a strong attachment to whatever it is that your nation stands for, the more willing you are to act against it because you believe they're doing something wrong or otherwise. If we're to try to take away a general model from this relatively exploratory research, we might say that a person who's willing to engage in attacks on or offline believes in social equality, has minimal attachments to their homeland, engages in different types of piracy, and is willing to attack both on and offline. But we don't know how stable this is across place or across time. And so that's why we are trying to go out and get different samples together. As we're putting more and more of this research together, we'd like to have as international a sample as is possible to get some of these additional variations, to understand more of what might be going on. So our relationships with other universities, we're trying to build that up to do what we can. We're also trying to be as inclusive as is possible. We would love to get some individuals from Middle Eastern nations involved, from Africa, from different parts of Europe as well. If you know anyone, if you find any of this interesting, please let us know. In general, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I thank you all for coming. I realize it's very early, so fire away. Thank you. Go ahead. The question is, age appeared to matter for different kinds of attacks in one circumstance, that the older they were, the more likely they were to engage in attacks. No, we did not bound age by any specific category. Instead, it's just a reflection of the age of the student population as a whole. At the high end, I think it was around 35, but we only have a small number of individuals who are in that age category. And this sample includes both undergraduate and graduate students, so we get a smattering of people at different age groups. Yes, ma'am?
That was part of my question was the age. Do y'all plan on trying to go above and beyond that 35, or are you trying to just stick to more university age up to
Sure. The question is, are we going to try to be more inclusive with regard to age? If possible, we'd like to, but just given the general nature of university samples, it's hard to get past a certain age bracket, and it might also be kind of a sampling bias. Some people might be, if they're working full-time, they might be less inclined to do a survey like this. But yes, if we could, we'd like to. Yes, sir. So the question is, you looked at skill, but could it also be something related to anonymity? Might that be important? It certainly could be. We have some other items that are included relating to how they perceive virtual environments, but we didn't include them in here. Instead, we thought, well, let's see if any of these sort of political science items might matter. Since only a few of them are significant, it's possible they might. So we are going to include these in our further analyses. Yes, sir.
You do include a lot of social group dynamics, but what about people who would you consider adding a question that involves people who consider like identifying with, like people who identify themselves with an outlying group, as compared to just believing in general group equality?
So the question is, we looked at this general perspective of what social group do you belong to. It's possible that being affiliated with or perceiving yourself as a minority group or attached to some other type of small group within a larger population might matter. We don't have that in our initial survey. We do have an item for what nation are you from. We didn't want to include religion or some other potential hot button issues that might turn someone off from completing it, but it's possible that it might, and that is something that we definitely will think about including in further survey.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean like get specific, like what you believe in, but like, do you identify with a group that is considered smaller than the whole? Things like that?
Sure, that's very possible that that might matter. Yes, ma'am.
You said you did your study at Midwestern University. Do you think it would make a difference if you tried another region around the country?
Absolutely, it certainly might. The question is, does regionality perhaps bound the sample? And it might. And what we can say is that to a certain degree, this is representative of larger Midwestern states, but yeah, it might matter with regard to Northeast or West or otherwise. So if we could get some other universities cross country, could work. Yes, sir.
How is it possible or can you take into account comparing the ones that factor in their percentage, because some of the damage that's caused by those individuals, what they call it, lone wolf aspect, they're sitting down, all of a sudden something in the news triggers them like that. Is there some way to factor that?
So the question is, how do we capture the lone wolf, perhaps paranoid actor who suddenly finds an issue and acts on it? So sort of, in a physical context, the Timothy McVeighs of the world. Not necessarily. I don't know that we could find that, but it is a question that if we could find a way to address it, it would be helpful. I don't know of any ways to do it right off the top of my head, but it's possible that there could be some way to get that. Any other questions? I know there were still some hands up. Yes, sir. The willingness to engage in attacks in support of another group, is that just perhaps part and parcel of being in a college campus, maybe just the general dynamic of being within this age group? It's possible. It's hard to say, though, whether this is just a representation of U.S. college students as a whole. I don't know. If we can find other ways to get at this, hopefully we can find ways to answer it. With the Italian, the Russian, and the Taiwanese samples, we're hoping that that might get at that a little bit more with different regional and national contexts. Perhaps there are some differences. Yes, sir. So if I heard correctly, your point is with regard to policies and how that might affect behavior? Gotcha. Yeah, so perhaps the way that we've operationalized the scenario in terms of some country, whether it's your home country or another one, is using policies that affect the group. Without specifying policy, maybe we're missing some intrinsic motivation that could be important. That certainly could be. We've tried to figure out a variety of different ways to capture how we would strategize measuring attack. And we didn't want to get too specific in terms of using physical violence against the population or economic sanctions or otherwise. We tried to make it as kind of nondescript as is possible, so that way, unfortunately, you're right, we might be missing some motivation, perhaps in the context of either an invasion scenario or a repressive regime. It might be a different dynamic. It is certainly possible, but it's hard to tease out those specific items. Yes, are you on the way back? Can you say that again really loud? I think I heard you. Are there any causal relationships thus far? So far, we can only say that based on these analyses, the description that I have here seems to best capture it with these correlates. In general, the social equality items being significant, the emotional attachment to your homeland being significant. Whether that is truly causal or not, I can't say, but these appear to be strong correlations for different types of attacks, most extreme types of attacks, and willingness to engage in multiple attacks. Yes, ma'am.
I realize that you're focusing mainly on the college population.
Mhm.
And as you pointed out, that's very, very limited as far as age range and stuff. However, something such as this conference,
Mhm.
you have everything from adolescents to graybeards, and they're from all over the world.
Mhm.
Have you thought of perhaps doing like a sister study with similar questions that's pretty much known to people that are already doing IT and
It's a very good question. Have we thought about trying to expand it? Yes, we have. It's somewhat hard to do, if for no other reason than having tried to collect surveys at hacker conferences and things like that before. It can be something of a challenge. But yeah, we'd love to find a way to access larger populations. We did this as kind of a startup within both of our institutions as a means of seeing if any of these items would even work. And now that they appear to have some salience, that's why we're trying to take it international. And if we could do something, whether telephone or physical conferences or otherwise, we'd absolutely love to. And you make a good point. Perhaps this kind of bounding of a group might have, we might find different results with a larger sample. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. So the first point relates to anonymity. Maybe that does have some influence here. You're absolutely right. The second point is how we are perceived might affect the responses that we get. There is truth to that. That's why when we administered the survey, we sent it out to a 25% stratified sample of the university. We offered no kind of payment for participation or otherwise, and just clearly elaborated the purpose of the study and our role as researchers within the institution. This was not funded by any particular group or otherwise, so we were as transparent as is possible about our motives for conducting this survey. You're right that individual respondents might have their own kind of ideas about this. When I tell people I work in a school of criminal justice, that immediately sets off certain bells for some people. So you're right, this might influence some of the results. In general, however, I think this gives us at least an initial window into trying to explain some of this phenomena or identify relevant questions. So though certainly different factors might affect the individual respondent, I think this gives us a starting point, if nothing else, to begin a dialogue about who's going to engage in certain forms of attack. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir. Can you say that really loud? I heard something about punishment, but